The Orioles had some coaching positions to fill this offseason as both of their co-hitting coaches left for new jobs. Well, this week, they have filled a couple of those jobs. Cody Asche being promoted and Tommy Joseph being hired to the coaching staff. I'll tell you who those two guys are, plus a little bit from Mike Elias speaking about the team's spending this offseason. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, November 7th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the two coaching hires that were reported for the Orioles earlier this week. Cody Asche has been promoted to the Orioles' new hitting coach, and Tommy Joseph has been hired away from the Mariners to be assistant hitting coach on this big league staff. We'll talk about what each of these guys will bring to the O's and if the O's are still going to look to hire more on the hitting part of the staff and maybe some other guys who could be hired to fill some of those other vacancies. And then the GM meetings were this week in San Antonio. Mike Elias talked to the media, probably gave his most positive comments ever when it comes to this team spending money in free agency. We'll get to all that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So we start today with the fact that the Orioles have a brand new, well, not brand new, but new major league hitting coach for 2025. As was first reported by Masson back on Tuesday, the Orioles have promoted Cody Asche to be their major league hitting coach. Now, this is not a gigantic promotion for Asche, who has been with the big league ball club on the coaching staff for each of the past two seasons. The Orioles hired Asche before the 2022 season as their minor league upper level hitting coordinator. And after one great season in that role, the Orioles immediately promoted him to the big league staff for the 2023 season when he served that year as an offensive strategy coach. And he held that same role in 2024, working alongside co-hitting coaches Ryan Fuller and Matt Borg-Schulte. But the people I've talked to and kind of the reporting surrounds it suggest that Asche was almost essentially a third co-hitting coach, at least this year, for the Orioles. Was doing a lot of the same responsibilities that Fuller and Borg-Schulte were, and it really allowed them to split all the work up three ways. You got to think about how much a hitting staff does in terms of being able to work with all 13 hitters in that room, provide game plans for not just every starting pitcher, but also every reliever on opposing teams that you are facing, cage work, mechanical work, analytical adjustments, anything in terms of preparation. There's a lot to do, and Asche kind of stepped in as a third voice in that role this year, which made him a top candidate to be promoted to this role. With Borg-Schulte and Fuller, who were both hired in 2022 to be co-big league hitting coaches, found their way into that role for 3 years, and there was a little pushback after the Orioles really struggled offensively down the stretch this year. Neither were fired. Borg-Schulte left to become the hitting coach for the Minnesota Twins. That was an organization he was in AAA as a hitting coach when the Orioles first hired him in 2022. And Fuller, who had been with the O's for a while in the minors and major leagues, decided to leave the organization. And then it was reported this week that Fuller will become the hitting coordinator for the Chicago White Sox. So we knew Fuller, he had to have had another job lined up when he left. That was certainly the case. He'll be back working on the minor league side of things, won't be on the major league coaching staff for the White Sox, but he'll be trying to put together what is now a pretty good system in Chicago of hitters, despite a very, very bad major league team over there on the south side. But for Cody Asche, he had a lot of respect in that dugout. You heard guys talking about him. He's done some work with Ryan O'Hearn over the past 2 years, helping him kind of revamp the kind of hitter he is. And it seemed like he was a really good fit. He's only 34 years old, and he was a former big leaguer as well. He kind of combined all the things that, pieces here, pieces there that can really help you in this job. And to be honest, when I, talked about Borg-Schulte and Fuller leaving and talked about the possible candidates, it always felt like Cody Asche was the main number one candidate. Even if the Orioles went with co-hitting coaches again, to be promoted into one of those roles. And we're unsure, if the O's will hire another co-hitting coach or they'll just go with the one main hitting coach this year. But either way, Asche gets this job and seemed to be the number one easiest and hire that made the most sense to keep some of the stability in that room. Now, Asche, when the Orioles hired him in 2022, he'd only been coaching for 1 year. After his playing career ended in 2020, the Phillies hired him in 2021 to be their hitting coach for their single A affiliate. And after 1 year there, the Orioles said, we love this guy, hired him as a minor league hitting coordinator. 1 year later, he is on the big league staff. It has been quite a run for Asche, who did play in the big leagues 2013 to 2017 with the Phillies and the White Sox, had a 668 OPS in 390 career big league games, as I've talked about plenty of times in this podcast. Whether or not you played in the big leagues, whether or not you had success or not in the big leagues, has very little to nothing to do with if you can be a good coach at the big league level. That should be known, but some people think you have to be a good big leaguer to be a good coach. A lot of the times, guys who are the best big leaguers are the worst coaches because for them, it just kind of comes easy and they don't really know how to teach to get to the level that they were at. But clearly, Cody Asche has a knack for the teaching to move up the ranks this quickly. And now he becomes the Orioles hitting coach. I mean, he's 34 years old. 4 years ago, he was still trying to play professional baseball. He is now the hitting coach for what I think most people would agree is a top 5 offense in Major League Baseball going into 2025. Congratulations to Asche, again, a guy who seems to be very well liked in that room, gets a very well-deserved promotion. And now we kind of see, okay, how do the Orioles build that hitting staff around him? Because again, with Borg Schulte and Fuller both gone, Asche was the last one left. He gets promoted. They were going to at least hire an assistant hitting coach. They were going to at least have 2 guys. I mean, you look around Major League Baseball, every single team has at least 2 people on that hitting coaching staff. And a lot of them have 3 or more, but 2 is basically the minimum. And the Orioles made that hire as well this week. And I talked about the fact that the Orioles probably were going to make at least 1 internal hire or promotion. That's Asche. There could be another one. And probably make at least 1 external hire on this hitting staff. And they made the external hire, at least reportedly, this week as well. And when I went through a lot of candidates on an earlier episode, I tried to find all of those Astros connections. That's where the Orioles usually go. Guys connected to Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal, or maybe some old Brandon Hyde connections as well. Hired Tommy Joseph to be their assistant hitting coach. Didn't have any connections to those guys, but as always, there was a connection. We'll tell you a little bit about Tommy Joseph, the Orioles' new assistant hitting coach, coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhoodgold.com or robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Elly De La Cruz rookie card just isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Well, thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I listed was hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. And those Arena Club slab packs, they are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. Their grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent. And right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb, code LOCKEDONMLB for 10% off your first purchase. So the promotion of Cody Asche to Major League hitting coach wasn't the only coaching move that the Orioles have reportedly made this week, as also reported by Masson on Tuesday. Again, these two moves have not been made official by the Orioles, at least at time of recording here around 6 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, but they have been reported by Masson and others that Tommy Joseph is being hired by the Orioles as the assistant hitting coach. Now, Joseph is hired away from the Seattle Mariners. He spent this season as the assistant hitting coach for the Mariners in their big league dugout. Now, he was hired to that role in 2024, but only about 2 months in, he actually got an expanded role in that dugout. The Mariners in May fired their bench coach, Brant Bray, who was also serving as their, quote, offensive coordinator. So he was doing bench coach responsibilities, but he was kind of also leading up the hitting department for the Mariners, and he got fired. So everybody that worked on that hitting squad kind of moved up one rank when that firing was made in May. So Joseph was doing even more than your usual assistant hitting coach from basically June on for this Mariners team. And then he got elevated again because in August, if you remember, the Mariners, after struggling again, fired their manager, Scott Service, and also fired hitting coach Jared DeHart. So DeHart was out and Bray were out. Those were the top two hitting instructors in that Mariners dugout. And a lot of it then fell on Tommy Joseph for the remainder of the season. Now, the Mariners played a little bit better, tried to keep themselves in the playoff race, ultimately did not make the postseason, and the struggles of their offense was the main issue, mostly because they had one of the best starting pitching staffs in baseball. Now, it is an offense that was still closer to middle of the pack. They were 12th in WRC+, 21st in runs scored in Major League Baseball this year. Some of it, lack of talent on the team. Some of it is they play in one of the worst hitters parks in Major League Baseball. That certainly plays a large factor to the Mariners' offensive struggles. But it is cool that Tommy Joseph, in his first big league coaching job, basically by the end of the year was the main hitting coach for the Mariners because the guys ahead of him had been relieved of their duties. And it does tell you something where you could say, oh, the Mariners struggled offensively. Why would the Orioles hire someone from that staff? But here's the flip side of it. The Mariners fired basically the two other guys were on that staff, and they kept Tommy Joseph around. They continued to believe in Tommy Joseph. That should tell you something. And the Orioles go and pick him up again to be the assistant hitting coach on this Orioles staff. Now, this was, as I mentioned, his first MLB coaching job. He was initially hired to begin in the coaching game by the New York Mets. They hired him as a minor league hitting coach at the high A level in 2021. So he started in coaching at the same time that Cody Asche did. The Mets promoted him to be their double A hitting coach in 2022. And then he kind of switched organizations. The Giants hired him away in 2023, but didn't necessarily give him a promotion. He went back down to the high A level to be the hitting coach at the Giants high A affiliate in 2023. But still, the Giants do generally a pretty good job of hiring coaches. So Tommy Joseph still pretty sought after. And the Mariners obviously like what they saw as well, because after that 2023 season, they hired him onto their big league coaching staff to be their assistant hitting coach. Now, just like Cody Asche, Tommy Joseph was a big leaguer at one point. He was a former second-round pick out of high school by the San Francisco Giants as a catcher, was a top prospect at one point, but had multiple concussions in the minor leagues, ended up moving to first base defensively because of those concussions and just felt he wasn't really able to catch anymore. And then he was traded to the Phillies in the Hunter Pence deal that sent Pence from Philadelphia to San Francisco. And Philly is where Tommy Joseph got his chance in the big leagues, made his debut in 2016 with the Philadelphia Phillies, played 2 seasons in the big leagues, and honestly was a pretty good hitter. 43 home runs, a 757 OPS in the major leagues in 2 years with the Phillies. That's pretty impressive, but there were other injury issues. He wasn't producing as well, and he ended up back in the minor leagues in 2018 after he was DFA'd. He bounced around the minors for a little bit. After that, he went and played in Korea in 2019. He played a little bit in Dominican Winter League in 2020 and 2021 was kind of the last time he was playing professional ball. But Tommy Joseph is kind of an interesting statistic as a player in the history of Major League Baseball. He was kind of seen at the time in 2016 as the replacement for Ryan Howard. Philly's first baseman was kind of getting older. He was still on the roster, but you could tell the end was near for Howard. Joseph was, a prospect who had gone down a little bit in his prospect rank, was still an exciting hitter, was hitting home runs, was, doing some damage for some bad Phillies teams there, the 2 years he was there. But then he just never put it back together. Tommy Joseph, and I believe this stat is at least still consistent, is the only player in Major League history to have 20-plus home runs in each of his first 2 seasons. He hit 21 as a rookie and then hit 22 the next year in 2017 with the Phillies. He is the only player in big league history to have 20-plus home runs in each of his first 2 big league seasons and then never play in the majors again after that. That is kind of a wild stat that has followed Tommy Joseph around. Of course, he's now back in the big leagues as a coach starting last year with the Mariners. But just a weird career for Tommy Joseph. But again, he is a guy who did play in the bigs, has that experience, but definitely had to grind for it and went through some interesting things after he had some success at the major league level. Now, there's not a lot of info out there about Joseph as a coach. Again, he has been doing it for super long, and most of the info is just about, hey, Tommy Joseph kind of took things over at the end of last season for the Mariners. I'm sure we'll get some great reporting on Joseph as this becomes a little more official in the coming days about, how he worked out in that Mariners system. But I mentioned there's always a connection, right? Now, a lot of the Orioles' recent coaching hires, there's been, some sort of Astros connection. Orioles bringing in Drew French as their new pitching coach last year, used to be a pitching coach in the minor leagues with Houston. A lot of these guys have connections to the old Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal team in the Astros. And I looked at a lot of names that I thought the Orioles could have brought in to fill those roles that had those Astros connections, and they still could do it. Like they had 3 people on their hitting staff last year. There's only 2 right now. They could certainly make another hire to this big league staff. But there is a connection because you may have heard me mention the Phillies for Cody Asche and Tommy Joseph. That's right. Cody Asche and Tommy Joseph, currently the 2 members of the Orioles big league hitting coaching staff, were teammates on the 2016 Philadelphia Phillies. Now, that was not a great team. They won 71 games. Those are kind of the dark days of Phillies baseball there in the mid-2010s. But Cody Asche and Tommy Joseph know each other well, and they are now back together on this coaching staff for the Baltimore Orioles. Now, there are still some openings on this staff, at least 1, maybe 2 major league coach openings. If the Orioles do hire another member of the hitting department at the major leagues, I would think it would be an internal promotion from the minors. Someone like a Brink Ambler or a Sherman Johnson or a Mike Montville feels like someone who could get that promotion to the staff to kind of round things out, but still looking for maybe another major league coach, still looking for a bench coach, still some things to be figured out. But we did hear some reporting surrounding the bench coach hire coming out of the GM meetings in San Antonio this week. That wasn't the only thing. Mike Elias talked to the media as well, and we heard some positive things from here about how this offseason could go for the Orioles. We'll break all of that down to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, we know there won't be any Major League Baseball tickets purchased at Game Time for a little bit, but they still got football tickets, they got basketball tickets, they got hockey tickets. We got a lot going on right now. And also, you know what? We got concerts, theater. You can go and comedy tickets, maybe you can get them at Game Time too. Hey, if you're just a baseball fan and the offseason means no sports for you, I get it. Go see a comedy show. They're really fun too. And you can get the tickets at Game Time because Game Time Picks, their curation, makes it easier to save on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And listen, they've got their lowest price guarantee. So Game Time, they'll credit you 100% of the difference if they can't guarantee that low price. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with a $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So to wrap things up here, just wanted to talk about a little bit of stuff coming out of the GM meetings this week. They were Monday through Thursday, wrapping up today in San Antonio, Texas, where all of baseball's general managers / presidents of baseball operations get together to kind of kick off the offseason. Now, generally, there's not a lot of moves that are made at the GM meetings. You'll see a couple of things that happen. The Guardians re-signed Austin Hedges to a 1-year deal. He's out in terms of Orioles backup catcher options. You might see some smaller moves like the Angels bringing in Kyle Hendricks on a 1-year deal to add to their rotation and give him a chance to kind of bounce back. You see the deals like that, but mostly you get news out of these GM meetings because most of the GMs will talk to the media kind of for the first time since those, end of season press conferences, and the Orioles had theirs a little earlier than they would have liked here this year. And you get a lot of reports about what teams' plans are really heading into the offseason. And again, there's still generally about a month until the offseason moves really start to kick off. We have this flurry of kind of minor stuff this week that I've covered all week on the podcast. If you want to check out yesterday's episode, we talked about the waiver claims of Thaddeus Ward and Rene Pinto and adding Luis Gonzalez to the 40-man roster. Back to Tuesday, we talked about all the option decisions. The Orioles kind of shocker to decline the option of Danny Coulombe. But we at least get some words about what these teams may do here this offseason. And I preface this by saying my rule has always been and will continue to be, I put little to no stock in anything that Mike Elias says when it comes to like the future moves and plans for the team and the front office. Now, maybe that has changed now that he's no longer working under John Angelos, and instead it's David Rubenstein at the helm, and certainly his quotes have changed, and we will get to that in just a moment. But the amount of word salad he's given, and I don't say this as fully a negative thing, it's just kind of a reality thing of how he runs his press conferences. It's just a lot of word salad. He tiptoes the line of pretty much everything he talks about, and it never really amounts to a whole lot of anything when he talks. So I say that there to say that, he talked to Jake Rill of MLB.com and other reporters at The Athletic this week in San Antonio. And he talked about a few things that I wanted to talk about. First was he was obviously asked about the decision to decline the $4 million team option on Danny Coulombe. I talked about it on Tuesday's episode. I thought, hey, Coulombe might not be the same, right? The stuff was down. Velocity was down when he returned from the elbow injury in late September. But I figured he's just been so productive for the Orioles that at $4 million, even if you think he's hurt and he's a little compromised, isn't it worth it to just pay him $4 million with Rubenstein at the helm and just see if he's still got it when he gets to spring training in Sarasota? Doesn't that seem like still a pretty low risk? Where the Orioles apparently still didn't think that way. And I thought, okay, there's got to be another major injury on the horizon where the Orioles think, hey, he's going to miss a lot of next year. We're not going to pay him $4 million. Maybe we bring him back on a minor league deal. Maybe it's Tommy John, whatever it may be. That doesn't seem to be the case. Mike Elias telling reporters that at least didn't mention a new injury and said they would stay in contact with Coulombe. And that means, potentially still looking to re-sign him on a lesser deal at some point this offseason, but said he knows Coulombe will have suitors from other teams and talked about how good he had been for the O's. But reading between the lines, it seemed like the Orioles were just so convinced because of the velo down and the stuff being down that he would just basically never be good again with the injuries and the fact that he's 35, that they felt comfortable, even with it just being $4 million, to cut him loose and save that $4 million. And I hope he does come back on a smaller deal, a minor league deal, whatever. But I don't know. It's still odd to not just keep him around for it's $4 million for a Major League Baseball team. It's even more odd now that, at least from Elias talking, it doesn't seem like hey, he's going to get Tommy John tomorrow or something like that. That doesn't seem to be the case. Just still kind of a bizarre decision, but it kind of is what it is at this point. But I think the bigger thing that Elias talked about was about the Orioles adding big players this offseason. He was obviously asked about the potential of losing Corbin Burnes and or Anthony Santander and what the Orioles would do to try to replace them this offseason if that happened. And he gave some interesting quotes saying, quote, if we have something that we want to do and we need financial support, I'm exceedingly confident that that's going to be there. Those were not things he was saying about John Angelos. Had some other quotes he gave to The Athletic where he basically said as much as, hey, if we want to spend money on a player, we have the support from David Rubenstein to give us that cash to make that offer to a player and bring him in. And those are all great things. It sounds like the Orioles are going to be much bigger spenders, or at least willing to spend a lot more this offseason than they have been in the past. But it's Mike Elias and it's all words until it happens. So we just are kind of going to wait back and see. He did give us a little wish list as well for the offseason. He said starting pitchers. That's not a surprise. He said to fill the holes in the rotation, whether it be filling the Corbin Burnes hole or even if they somehow bring him back, still adding beyond that. Max Fried, Corbin Burnes, Blake Snell, the guys right now at the top of the free agent market. The Orioles should be targeting all those guys to try and bring them in. He also talked about adding more catching. That at the very least, he's looking for a backup catcher. They already brought in Rene Pinto earlier this week on waivers to compete for that backup job. James McCann is a free agent. They could always bring him back. But if they do want a vet who's got a little bit of a higher ceiling than McCann, Travis d'Arnaud had his option decline. Kyle Higashioka had a great year. Danny Jansen is a guy who's out there. Those are some interesting options for the Orioles to be Adley's backup. And then I think the piece, the hitter that a lot of Orioles fans have been on board with this team adding is Elias did mention a right-handed hitting outfielder that they're looking to add. And, that list of who they could target is different depending on if Santander is an Oriole or if he's on another team next year. Because if you bring back Santander, you're probably adding like another Austin Slater type fourth or fifth outfielder as your right-handed hitting outfield guy. But if Santander signs elsewhere, you're looking for a much more of an impact bat, someone in the Teoscar Hernandez, Tyler O'Neill range, maybe Mark Canha, but I'd like to go higher than that range of those right-handed hitting outfield bats. So there are certainly some interesting names that are out there, and we will definitely hear more from Elias as the offseason goes on. May not hear from him again until the winter meetings the first week of December. Again, that's usually when the moves kind of fully pick up in the baseball offseason. And again, I rarely take what Elias says at face value, but it's nice to know that in terms of spending and adding to the team, that's more positive than he has ever been in that stint. That is directly related to the fact that David Rubenstein is willing to spend and is now the new owner of this ball club. But the other interesting things that came out from the GM meetings this week and some reporting from initially Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic is surrounding the Orioles bench coach opening. The Orioles let Freddie Gonzalez go, who had been their bench coach for the last 5 years. They hired alongside of Brandon Hyde to kind of be a veteran former manager to be alongside him, and the two got along very well, but he was let go this offseason. There's been some talk about potentially, is Buck Britton, the Orioles AAA Norfolk manager, the right fit to just elevate into that role? That is certainly still a possibility. But Ken Rosenthal reported that the Orioles are interested in David Ross. Now, he did say he was not able to report yet whether or not there was interest on Ross's end on joining the Orioles in a bench coach role. But if you know David Ross, he managed the Chicago Cubs for a good chunk of time. Remember, he was a player on that Cubs team that won the World Series and broke the drought in 2016, then retired after that year, and then was hired as the Cubs manager in 2020 and spent the next 4 seasons as the Chicago Cubs manager. They hired him to replace Joe Maddon, and he had, I don't know if he had success. He made the shortened playoffs in 2020. Then he had 2 straight losing seasons. Then he won 83 games in 2023, but missed the playoffs. And the Cubs didn't outwardly fire him, but they went and spent big money on Craig Counsell to hire him away from the Brewers and basically just dismissed David Ross after that. Now, a couple weeks after that happened last November, the Yankees reached out to Ross. They wanted to hire him as their new bench coach, and David Ross was just not interested, basically saying that I only want to get back in right now if it's a managerial job. And he ended up not having a job as a Major League Baseball coach last year. However, maybe things are different. 1 year later, is he interested in getting back in? It would be an interesting fit, a guy who's been in that manager chair before. and a guy who knows Brandon Hyde well. When Ross was that kind of veteran presence catcher for the Cubs in 2015 and 2016, Brandon Hyde was the first base coach for that Cubs team. Rosenthal reporting that they know each other well. They still very much keep in touch. The two are close, so it would be definitely an interesting fit. And then there was also some reporting as well from Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News, who covers the Texas Rangers, that Luis Arruda, who is about to be hired as the Rangers bench coach, he reported that the Orioles were also interested in him. He had served as the Marlins bench coach under Skip Schumacher for the past couple of years. So it looks like, I'm sure the Orioles are interviewing Buck Britton, but they are certainly targeting outside candidates as well for that bench coach role. And of course, whenever the Orioles do make that hire and kind of fill out the rest of their major league coaching staff, we'll have it all covered here on the pod. But we've got one more episode coming up this week. I'll be back with you tomorrow. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some awards. The Gold Gloves came down, Silver Slugger finalists. Orioles had a lot of guys hit minor league free agency. Some kind of bigger names like Bruce Zimmerman and Nick Vespi have become free agents. We'll talk about the chances the Orioles will try to bring them back on some minor league deals, keep them in the organization, and then any other Orioles news and notes we may get to on a Friday. That's coming up tomorrow, though. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.